Welcome to Helping Organizations Thrive. Today, I have the great pleasure of Alain Hunkins. Welcome, Alan.
Thank you so much, Julian. I'm really excited to be here with you today.
Yeah, no, I'm really good to have you on as well. And I'm just going to tell the audience a little bit about you, and I'm sure that will all come out as we talk as well in the conversation. So you're the CEO of Hunkins Leadership Group, which is all about strategic consulting in human performance improvement, problem solving, and innovation. You're a speaker, consultant, trainer, and coach, and you've had over 20 years in your career as led sort of 2,000 groups in 25 countries, which is quite incredible, really. And you've worked with the likes of Walmart, Pfizer, State Farm Insurance, IBM, General Motors, just to name a few big sort of businesses you've worked with there. And you are a best-selling author, which I'm sure we will share a little bit of that today, a book called Cracking the Leadership Code, 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. And you're also a TEDx speaker. So wealth of experience. And I do thank you for coming on, because I love having people with this level of experience, because if nothing else, I will learn a lot from you today. So yeah, that's where we are. But before we go into that, I want to really ask you, what do you love about what you do?
What I love about what I do is that every day I get to live my mission. So I'm a big believer that what leaders do is they make their implicit assumptions explicit. And what better place to start than being really explicit about what one's life mission is? So my life mission is to create a vibrant and alive world by kindling the fire of brilliance in people. So I get to do that. And what lights me up more than anything else is helping people to realize their potential and start to make strides towards it and start to achieve things that they didn't think were possible. So that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. And the fact that I get to do this and I get paid to do this too, what a bonus. So that's what gets me excited and why I'm thrilled to do what I do.
I can see it really gets you energized. Your energy just started to lift as you shared that mission statement.
Yeah.
What got you to that? I mean, when did that happen? When did you get that realization of like, wow, this is what I'm here for?
Wow, surprisingly, maybe it happened pretty early on for me. When I say that professionally, it happens clearly when I was 27 years old, and I'll give you a little preface on this to get there. So, why would someone be really clear on their introspective mission of purpose in life at 27? Well, I had a pretty unique childhood. So I grew up in New York City. That's not unique. I was raised by a single mom, also not very unique. And my grandmother also moved in because my parents divorced. My grandmother moved in to help my mom raise my brother and I. Well, the part where it gets unique is the fact that my mother and my grandmother are both survivors of the Holocaust. So they were in Belgium. My grandmother and her husband were Polish Jews who emigrated to Belgium. And then when the Nazis invaded, my mother, who was 7 at the time, was put into hiding and was hidden through the Belgian underground for 3 years and didn't see her mom. Moved from place to place. She was given a false name, had her hair dyed blonde, moved into convents. I mean, kind of like the Diary of Anne Frank. That was my mother's life for 3 years. And then she was reunited with her mother. So I share all this because, as you can imagine, these were my primary caretakers, my parents, who had a very different worldview than, let's say, my friends in New York City public schools growing up in the 1970s. And so what I quickly became attuned to leaders, and in this case, my family leaders create the vibe in which everyone around them either survives or thrives. And that really got me interested in this. And the other thing is kind of when I get to be 26 years old, after dabbling in psychology and theater and Buddhist studies and all kinds of introspective things, trying to figure out, I guess you could call it man's search for meaning, to borrow from Viktor Frankl, is I went on a personal development weekend workshop where we did a mission statement process or mission process. And it was then that I realized that what I wanted to do was create a vibrant and alive world by kindling the fire of brilliance in people, because suddenly I was in this environment that felt so liberating and empowering. I just knew I wanted more of that. So I started volunteering for that organization and learning as much as I could from the people around me with no expectation of this is going to lead to becoming a best-selling author or anything. It was just the work meant so much to me. So that's why I got on this path when I did. And so I feel very lucky to have gotten that lesson early on.
Well, clearly you had some amazing role models with your mum and your grandma. That's incredible, which obviously
Yes.
inspired you. And it's interesting, isn't it, how when we know our purpose and we know our why, how you would have to worry about the financial piece. It's not about that. It's actually that's the purpose that just drives you and will get you to the places where you want to get to and how you want to do it. And that will keep you the motivation. It'll stir you. It'll create the passion, the creativity, the wave of forth how to get out of it. And I think that's really important to know. And I think as leaders, it wasn't for a number of years before I got to my clarity of what my sort of mission was. But actually now I know it makes me very focused on what I do and why I do it, and what I get excited about and what I get enjoyment out of is so important. And I think for all of us, we need to do those weekends away like you did and do a personal mission statement, which I always encourage a lot of my clients to get to that place of clarity. Now, leadership, and we're going to talk a little bit about the science of leadership, and the reason why I'm fascinated. I'm a scientist by design or by learning. I've got a science background, so I'm quite fascinated on your take on that. But just before we go into that, I'd like to understand in how you would define leadership.
Sure. So my definition of leadership is rather broad. I would say that any time that anyone is trying to influence anyone, that could be themselves or someone else, to get anything done, that takes leadership. So at its core, it's about influence. And so you don't need a title to be a leader. And if you look at that very broad definition, it means that every single one of us is leading every day. And if not anyone else, we are leading ourselves. And how do we choose to show up? That's the key. And so easier said than done. And I'm sure we'll get into that in the conversation.
It's very easy to say, isn't it?
Yes.
I think you made a valid point that I think where people do forget is that leading ourselves. I think that's a good place to start. So, if I say, tell me more about the sort of the science behind leadership, where this sort of evidence and sort of things that will make us think, actually, there's something in this a bit more we can sort of put our hands on and be more tangible about.
Sure. Well, I think a good place to start with the science is just to look at some of the global data around how people perceive leaders. So, leadership at its core, it is a relationship between two people, and a leader and someone who chooses to follow. So global data has shown over the years, and I'll use one of the studies that comes out of this, is that on average, about 23% of people think their leaders lead well, and only about 31% think their leaders communicate well, and less than half, about 49% of people trust their leaders in large organizations around the world. There's different studies. So I share all this as preface.
That's quite shocking numbers there, isn't it, really?
They are all shocking numbers. So the numbers have been in this ballpark for decades. So what this tells me is there's a huge gap between what people intend and how they are perceived. And here's, I think, the origin of the problem. Most people who wind up in leadership roles got there because they were doers. They were high achieving doers who got stuff done. And someone said, hey, Julian, you're a really good salesman. Let's make you the sales manager. Now, there's a huge difference between being a high performer, the salesman, and facilitating high performance in the team of salespeople. And that gap can't be closed by just doing what you did so well. It's a completely different skill set. And, much in the way you were talking earlier about many people don't discover their mission, a lot of leaders never hit that moment of insight, that wake-up call of going, gosh, the way I'm doing this maybe isn't so good. I need to change. Because what feeds into this is you're the leader. You've got the job, you've got the paycheck, you've got the position, you have the power. And how many people that you lead have the courage to speak up and say, Julian, actually, you're a lousy communicator. I don't trust you. And I think you're basically bad. Because doing so in most hierarchical settings is a massive career limiting move. So which means we, to borrow a quote from Daniel Kahneman, what we do is we stay blind to our own blindness. And so we perpetuate these really poor role models of leadership. And we basically continue leading the way the people that led us did, because that's how we learn. We learn through copied behavior, which means most of us, and again, if it's only 23% are leading well, the majority, 77% of us, are basically leading out of an inherited leadership legacy that has its roots in the industrial age, where at the time, and the father of the field of management, Frederick Winslow Taylor, and if you read his book, Principles of Scientific Management, he gets into this. At the time, the thinking was there's management or leaders who do all the thinking, they're the brains, and then there's the brawn, where literally it was, and this is what he says. He says in his book, the ideal workman would be so stupid and phlegmatic that he more nearly resembled in his mental makeup the ox than any other type. So the idea is you're a beast of burden. Literally, that's what you are. And Henry Ford said it well as well. Henry Ford was a disciple of Taylor's, and he said, why is it every time I want a pair of hands, they come with a brain attached? Right? So this was the mindset. Basically, I'm the leader, and I tell you what to do, and you're the laborer, and you shut up and you do it. I mean, I don't mean to be blunt, but that's the mindset
and do you
we
think
come from.
Think that's been inherent then for the last 40, 50 years then within Industrial Revolution?
I do. I think it's been inherent. And in that book, by the way, Principles of Scientific Management, Taylor's book was voted the most influential management and leadership book of the 20th century, right? Because it was like, scale, process, industrialization. Now, as we hear this today, we're like, come on, we're more evolved than this. It's 2021. Come on. Here's the thing. You may be evolved in moments, but in those moments of pressure and crisis, when the proverbial stuff hits the fan, how do you show up? Because in those moments, that's when leadership is tested. So good example of that is, how have you managed the coronavirus pandemic with the people you lead? Are you showing up and leaning into being more empathic and caring? Because, by the way, we're all dealing with a global health crisis and trauma, and that people need that extra support. Or even like, I don't know, I'm waiting for senior management to roll something out for this, that we can drill down into our people. And by the way, drilling down is a total industrial age metaphor, right? You don't sit here and go, oh, no one's drilled into me lately, I miss that. So there are pieces that when we are under pressure, it's so easy to default to, because I'm your boss, just do it, because I'm telling you to. So it's a challenge.
And obviously, in the last 12 months, I think, the pandemic has certainly tested the mettle of leadership. And in some cases, it's proved to be a real blessing and enable people to show something that perhaps they didn't realize they had inside them.
Yes.
And in other situations, it's been probably dreadful. And there's obviously a continuum of all that. I am aware that there's been a lot more empathy has come through in the last 12 months. Whether that's been forced to, because everybody's talking about it. You have to be more empathetic because of the nature of things. But I hope it will stay. So how do we take something that has been generationally sort of handed down? And as you say, role modeling is such a powerful thing. And we model how we were led to the next generation and so on and so on. How do we break that? And how do we change it? Because it's not a simple go on a training course here. It's a whole new mindset and a different perspective. So how do we do that in organizations to start to change a culture here?
Well, Julian, I love what you said about role modeling there. I think I want to touch on that again because it's so important. It's very, very difficult to start to demonstrate things that you have never actually seen. And so my offer to people who are going, gosh, I don't really have leaders who model this, what we're saying, so go seek out those role models elsewhere. They may not be in your organization, but I mean, in this knowledge work, digital age, there are so many great talks, leaders talking about what they're doing, So for example, watch some podcasts with Hubert Joly, who is the CEO of Best Buy. He talks about how he shifted that organization's culture completely by making it more people-centered. And here's one of the things he did that you can steal, because I have, which is really quite simple. If you think about most management meetings, right? The monthly operating report meeting, whatever that might be, some version of that, maybe it's weekly, maybe it's monthly. What do you usually start with? probably start with, let's go through the performance numbers. Like, how are we doing? How's sales? How's profit? How's revenue? How's whatever your metrics are? You go into all that. And then you might talk about projects. Okay, here are our projects. Here's what we're working on. Here's what's working well, what's not working well. And then if there's a little bit of time left, which usually there's not, because all that stuff will take your time, you might talk about the people and what's going on with your people. Well, Hubert Joly at Best Buy completely flipped that paradigm. They would start their meetings and talk about their people, right? Like, whoa, we never did. What would it be like if we actually gave most of our focus on the people? Because the fact is, all those numbers are lagging indicators of the behaviors of the people you're doing. Sales don't just come out of a spreadsheet. Sales happen because you have a sales force who are closing deals in real time with real people that are real customers. And so, yeah, you'll get to your numbers, trust me. So a big thing that I coach leaders on is it's about focus and priority. Is that how can you stop focusing on the numbers first and instead start focusing on the people, because it's your people who deliver those numbers. So something as simple as that. When it comes to empathy, and again, my definition of empathy is really simple. It's showing people that you understand them and care how they feel. Now, as I'm sure you're listening to this, you're thinking, well, that's simple. I mean, I do that. And you do that in some places in your life. You do it with your family, your friends, your loved ones. It's harder to do it in places where you feel less connected to people, which often think about at work, especially when you feel pressure to deliver on deadlines and you have certain quality expectations of any deliverable. So one of the things I coach leaders around is if you want to show people that you understand them and care how they feel, AKA show empathy, you need to slow down, right? Sometimes, not all the time, but you have to take these moments. So for example, if you have a one-on-one meeting with somebody, all right, great, Julian, great. So how are things going? Right? And we're like, we've jumped into task mode. We're like, da-da-da-da-da, right? As opposed to, I've got a half an hour meeting with you scheduled. If I take 5 minutes up front, that meeting, Julian, how are you feeling today? And I just shut up and listen and give you the space, because I don't need to know. So this is another leadership myth, is that somehow we have to be omniscient. I have no idea, but I'm going to ask you and you're going to tell me, how are you feeling today? And I can hold space for you. And maybe that takes a minute or two. That is such a valuable investment in time, because what it does is it actually calms your central nervous system. So we're talking about the science here. So the physiology is when someone actually tunes in to what you're doing and saying and asks you how you're feeling, you start to calibrate. And if there's anything, so that's the first question. The second question would be, is there anything distracting you, keeping you from being present? Wow, again, I'm calibrating your nervous system so you can be super focused. And the third question is there anything that I can do to support you? Okay. And so by asking those three questions in the first 5 minutes, now when we get into the task, you are so much more settled. I'll give you an example just to bring this to life, because what that does is that creates connection, empathy, and trust. Everyone who's listening to this right now, I want you to think back to some emails that you've written. Have you had to write emails to people where the trust was low and you have spent 20 minutes crafting a 2-paragraph email and then you've sent it to 3 other people? Can you read this before I send this out? Because I'm not sure how, right? Whereas someone where trust is high, you don't even spell check the damn thing. You just send it because you just go. You have that relationship. So part of leadership wisdom is knowing there's a time and a place to go fast, and there's a time and a place to go slow. And you have to have the wisdom to know the difference and prioritizing the people first. And then we can, accelerate and then start to perform and deliver whatever results. Look, I get the fact we are not here to sit around and do group therapy. That is not the point of business. Like we have products, we have services, we have stakeholders on all facets. And part of it is understanding, like being a scientist, what works well. And so business needs to catch up to what science has known for a long time. And there's great research. It turns out the number one thing that influences performance, engagement, and retention is, do people feel cared for by their immediate supervisor? That is an incredibly soft and fuzzy thing. And yet it's the number one metric for determining high performance.
You said a lot there. And no, it's good. It's really good. And it's in some ways, it becomes quite a simple thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're not talking rocket science here. I'm not belittling what you're saying in terms of that. It's not that difficult.
No.
And it's interesting. I used to work for Johnson and Johnson, and I don't know if you know, they have a credo, like a
I know.
statement.
I know what a credo is, but no, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, but it starts with the people first and profits last. It's all about, they've upside down the whole. We're not about profit stakeholders. We're about our employees. And it's interesting that comes through the whole sort of organization, this people focus, and they have this thing about, making sure that our people are our greatest assets, and they truly believe that. And what you're saying there is literally going back to, just for the moment, put aside those numbers. Let's get into the people first, understand, show people that they care, and is understanding. And actually, because the people are delivering the numbers, the people are doing the task. And I think we get caught up with measuring people, and also in a remote world, it's gone a little bit silly and concerned. People, can they trust people working from home and everything else? And asking people, how are they today? That's really, really important. Yeah. So it is simplistic, and I'm going to say, how can we help people make that shift, but also make it a thing that it will do consistently? Where have you experienced it, where once people got that light bulb moment, I got it, and they do it?
Yeah. So yes, it's simple, but it's not easy. And the reason it's not easy is because people are notoriously creatures of habit. If you think about it, we tend to do today what we did yesterday. And if it's been working for us and we haven't felt enough of the pain point to switch, that wake-up call, it's so easy to default to the old behaviors. I mean, you don't even have to think about work. I mean, just think about how many of us have set a New Year's resolution. I'm going to get healthy and fit this year, or whatever that, and that quickly, 2 weeks in, you're back to your own patterns. So we have to start shifting patterns. And there's a couple of key things to make this work. Number one is, and this is tough, especially for kind of our Western culture, who thinks that it's about willpower and it's up to me to do this. So number one, no, it's not about willpower. Willpower is shockingly overrated. Is creating habits. And I'm a big fan of BJ Fogg's book, Tiny Habits. And his whole philosophy is the goal to start embedding new habits is you have to bring the bar way down so that you can easily achieve it. So for example, if you want to start flossing your teeth, he says, just choose to floss one tooth. And then here's the key, and then celebrate it. Celebrate your wins. The other thing that we tend to do in our Western culture is we tend to isolate and think, oh, this is some kind of moral character failing on me, as opposed to how can I create a community of support where we're all working on this together and we are vulnerable enough to share our successes as well as the times where, I jumped into task mode there and it's not so good. Or someone else can get, hey, Julian, can I give you some feedback? Can we pause for a second? Because we're totally running down here and I'm not really present for this yet. To create that level of honesty. And so it starts by embedding micro habits, little bits at a time. And it certainly helps to have a coach or facilitator structure this for you at the beginning to kind of give you these guardrails to stay within that. And then hopefully you can start to embed that and internalize these behavioral habits over time, that when the guardrails come off, you have your own anchors, or we call them in the habit world, prompts in place. Like we all have prompts all the time, right? When your phone rings, the ring is a prompt for you to pick up the phone, right? So we want to build in prompts so we don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about it. So for example, I work with a number of teams where this check-in process I just described of how are you feeling? Is there anything on your mind or distracting you? And how can I support you? It is so embedded. So every time they have a meeting, the first thing they do is, all right, let's check in. And if we don't, it would be like going to bed without brushing your teeth. Right? It's like, whoa, that's weird. I have to do that. So it's about embedding habits. And I work with teams and actually have created a 30-day online leadership challenge to teach these kind of habits for people, because, I can write a book, but I always say, like, writing a leadership book and people reading a leadership book, it's like reading a book about golf. You can read all day long. It's not going to make you a better golfer until you start applying what you're learning when you're actually on the green. And by the way, I'm not a golfer, but you can use that analogy for anything that's performing. So, because leadership is a performing art. It's what we say, it's what we do every day.
That's interesting, that the habit, as in lowering the bar, I really like that. And then celebrating. And we know that just by celebrating creates a sense of internal sort of dopamine and win and excites us, and therefore we get rewarded, and therefore we start to think, well, hey, this is really good, and that goes across small wins within your team as well in terms of how you're doing things. And it's interesting that when you talked about the group sort of almost accountability, are you talking that in a context of creating a psychologically safe team that would do that and feel safe to point out to the leader or to each other in a respectful way? Or are you talking the part of groups within an organization at a similar level or outside of that, or a mixture of that? How do you see that?
It's a great question. Yeah, absolutely. It is about psychologically being safe, and, great work. Amy Edmondson's book, The Fearless Organization, is a great resource if you want to learn more about psychological safety. So the question is, what does that group need to look like? I say ideally, it should be more than just you. So getting at least one other person. So they have a group of 2 people. Start small, right? And it can be your intact team. It can be your peer group. It can be multiple levels within an organization of hierarchy. But you need to find a place where people are committed to that key of psychological safety. That is so, so important, because without that, people feel like they're wearing a mask, and not just a literal one for COVID, but they're actually wearing a mask, a psychic mask, and they don't feel they can be fully themselves at work. And that is draining. It's interesting. I think it was Deloitte did a study a few years ago, and this was in the US. 61% of all employees say that they do not feel that they can be fully themselves when they show up to work. I mean, think about that number and think about the energy drain that is, because we all know what that's like. When you put on a show, put on that mask, you can't but be a bit disconnected, because there's a certain sense of falseness going on, as opposed to, how can I relax and be fully myself? And leaders are the ones who set the tone. And there are things that you can do to create psychological safety. You can draw people out. You can make sure that everyone on your team gets equal amounts of airtime. So if you're on that virtual meeting and you see Julian's been not saying anything, Julian, love to hear what you have to say here. How's that? Or if you know that people who are, let's say, extremely introverted or reflective learners, send them the questions in advance, because not everyone can think on the fly like this and give you your answers. They need to digest for a while. So
just on that, obviously, we've been doing remote working now for the last 12 months, and who knows what we'll go back to in terms of a hybrid of some form. How do we create that, again, that not just psychological safety in that remote sense, but also that accountability piece? And you said a point there about how can we read people, because it's harder remotely than it is in person.
Yeah. So here's my thing about reading people. If you can't read them, ask them. Make your implicit explicit. So ask them, hey, so
you always say some things that are so obvious. That's brilliant. I love that.
Well, but this is the thing, is I
love it.
I agree. But this is the trap that we fall into. I say, take off your superhero cape. Okay. You are the manager, the leader. Yes, but no one is expecting you to suddenly be a mind reader. So for example, we're now working from home. You didn't ask for this pandemic, neither did I. And so ask your people, so talk to me about communication. I mean, and this is the thing, is like, we feel weird asking it because we've never done it before. It's like, how often should we check in? Like, if we check in every day, how is that going to work for you? Some people like, oh my gosh, that would be awesome. And other people, I'm fine, I'm good. We could check in once a week. Or some people, they want once a month. It looks different for different people, but let's have the conversation and and here's the key thing, is we have to enter into this with a coach-like approach of being curious and not somehow judging the outcome. So if somebody says, yeah, I'd love to check in every day, like, you're high maintenance, we don't want to do that. It's this understanding, like, what do you need? What can I do to support you? What is going to support you? Because this is going to be different for different people and different businesses and functions and roles and talents and skills. But don't be the mind reader. Start to figure out and asking people what they need, and then see how you can support them. And if you can't support them, then be honest about it. So like, this is what I can do. I hear you want to meet twice a day. My bandwidth doesn't support that. However, what I can do is I can meet once a day, and you can check in with me on our Slack channel or whatever, is try to find solutions that can support the people that you need.
I like that. If you can't read people, ask them, and that's important. And it goes back to that, never assume, even you are reading somebody or observing something, you don't know what's going on really until
Exactly.
you ask, until you engage, until you get some sort of conversation going on. And I think it's important is to, in this time, to really keep those conversations going, however that's done, on a phone, Zoom, whatever's the easiest way, even email if it's appropriate. So what would be your last sort of thoughts in terms of, as we sort of carry on into this new brave world of post-pandemic, or whatever we want to call it, to leaders out there? What would be your one sort of big advice to really help sort of navigate the next sort of 6-12 months?
Wow. One big advice. I'll try to keep this short then. So there's a number, and we've touched on a lot of the themes. I think one is lead, and we could say lead by ask. So we'll call this ABC. Well, it's like, so start asking questions, right? Asking lots of questions and just continually ask, because especially when you're at a distance, you don't have any of that in-person vibe picking up on stuff. So you need to be really explicit about asking those questions. And then the next thing would be to be curious. That's the B. Be curious. Be really curious about what's going on. Have that inquisitive mind, which is, by the way, I find really challenging to be curious when my back script that's going on through my head is, I'm so busy. I'm so busy. It's really hard to be curious if you have no space for it. If your day, so start to think about creating some spaces, some blocks in your day, so when you're present to other people, you're actually present. Because there's a big difference between listening with purpose and listening to speak or to get through this. So being curious means being spacious around that. And then the third thing I would say is just communicate more than you think, because it's so in the absence of communication, and all the science proves this as well, is people default to the negative, right? No, like if I don't get a reply email, my first thought isn't, oh, I'm sure they're just really busy. My first thought is, why aren't they getting back to me, right? We're wired for negativity. That served our ancestors really well on the savannas. It kept them from getting eaten. But it doesn't work so well in our modern world. So we have to work against the negativity bias. So really over communicating. And in all of that, within the ABC of asking questions, being curious, and communicating, if I had to put that under one umbrella, is lean into being exceedingly human. Because what we all crave in this high-tech age is some high touch. So connection, community, collaboration, be the human leader that you want. Right. And be that change, because why shouldn't it start with you?
Brilliant. That is really good. I really like that. And I want to thank you for coming on today and taking your time out and sharing some great insights. I think there's an absolute ton of stuff in that sort of half an hour we've spent with each other. So yeah, thank you for coming on today. I appreciate it.
You're most welcome, Julian. Thank you.